Before we begin this strange and unforgettable tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you would have done in this rancher's boots. Deep in the dust-blown plains of the American Southwest, there lived a black rancher by the name of Elijah Booker. A man of few words and fewer friends, Elijah was known more for his silence than for his story. He owned a ranch as vast as the eye could see and ran it alone for nearly a decade. Folks in town respected him, but they also kept their distance. There was something about him that made people uneasy. Maybe it was his quiet eyes, or the old revolver he never let out of reach. Whatever it was, nobody asked questions. Elijah liked it that way. Until one day, a stranger rode into town with scissors in his saddlebag and silence in his mouth. The man was a barber. Or at least, that's what he said when he pinned a hand-carved sign to the old saloon door. Haircuts. No questions. No talking. It was strange, sure, but not stranger than anything else in that town. What really caught Elijah's eye was the man's calm, like he'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. 1 week later, Elijah found himself sitting in the dusty chair of that makeshift barber shop. It had been years since someone touched his hair. As the silent barber worked with eerie precision, Elijah watched the cracked mirror in front of him. Then he noticed something odd. The fogged-up glass, smeared by the barber's hand, was slowly revealing letters. Not just letters, his name, Elijah Booker. Written backwards in the condensation. He froze. His hand twitched toward the revolver at his hip. The barber didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just kept snipping. Elijah sat still, eyes locked on the name, pulse pounding like hooves on dry earth. What kind of trick is this? He thought. But the barber said nothing. He never did. When the cut was done, Elijah stood, dropped a silver dollar on the table, and left without a word. He rode straight back to his ranch, unease prickling the back of his neck. That night, sleep refused to come. He tossed, turned, and stared at the ceiling. The image of that name on the mirror burned into his mind like a brand. The next morning, he rode back into town before the sun was up. The barber was already there, sweeping the porch like he'd never left. Elijah confronted him, demanded answers, but got only silence in return. "How do you know my name?" he growled. No reply. The barber gestured for Elijah to sit again. Against his better judgment, he did. And once again, the mirror began to fog. Once again, his name appeared, but this time it was followed by a date. Elijah's birthday. Same month. Same year. That couldn't be coincidence. He stood up mid-cut and backed away. "What are you?" he whispered. But still, no reply. Only the distant cry of a hawk slicing through the morning wind. Elijah asked around, but no one knew where the barber had come from. He had no horse, no home, no record. Just a chair, some scissors, and a stare that could peel bark off trees. Some folks swore they'd seen him before, in different towns, always quiet, always cutting, always leaving behind more questions than hair. Elijah began to notice other things too. Dreams that weren't his. He'd wake up sweating, heart racing, remembering things that never happened to him. A burning house. A woman's scream. A pair of boots left by the door, untouched by time. Was the barber putting thoughts in his head? Memories? Warnings? One night, Elijah stayed up with his rifle across his lap. He kept his lantern low and his ears open. The wind howled like an old dog. And then, footsteps. Slow. Measured. Right up to the porch. Elijah didn't breathe. The door creaked open on its own. Nobody there. Just a gust of wind and something left on the floor. A single strand of hair. Curled. Gray. It wasn't his. He didn't know whose it was. But it smelled like lavender and smoke. He ran outside but saw nothing. Just the moon and the vast emptiness of his land, stretching far and wide. The next day, he rode to the barber shop, heart pounding. This time, he didn't ask questions. He sat in the chair. The mirror fogged again. His name returned, but now, the words "you killed her" appeared underneath. Elijah's blood ran cold. His hands gripped the arms of the chair like a man drowning in dry land. "Who?" he asked, voice cracking. The barber held up the mirror, clean, sharp, clear, and whispered the first words Elijah had ever heard from his mouth. "You already know." And with that, he walked out of the shop and vanished. The barber left behind only the mirror, and the ghost of a secret Elijah had buried long ago. Elijah stared into that mirror for hours. He saw faces, faces he thought he'd forgotten. A woman. Her smile. Her tears. Her hand reaching for him as fire engulfed the barn. He'd told himself it wasn't his fault, that it was an accident, that he'd done all he could. But the mirror told a different story, one he couldn't escape anymore. He packed the mirror and rode back to the ranch, trying to convince himself it was just a trick, a mind game. But the air felt heavier now, and shadows moved where light once ruled. Every night, the mirror fogged. Always the same message, his name, and that accusing sentence. Elijah stopped sleeping. He wandered his ranch like a ghost. His cattle grew restless. Coyotes gathered at the edges of his land but never crossed. Something about the place had changed. Or maybe it was him. One morning, he walked to the creek and saw the reflection of the woman in the water. Not just a vision, she was there, waiting, crying. He dropped to his knees, begged for forgiveness, but the wind swallowed his words. Elijah knew what he had to do. He saddled his horse and rode into the hills, following memories more than trails. He found the burnt remains of the old barn. Buried beneath the ash, he uncovered a locket, hers. Inside, a photo of them both. Smiling, young, before the fire, before the silence. He returned to the barber's chair one last time. The shop was empty, but the mirror still stood. This time, it didn't fog. It cracked, split right down the middle. Elijah looked into it and saw two versions of himself, one before the truth and one after. After that day, the silent barber became a part of the rancher's routine, even though he never spoke a single word. Each morning, the barber would sweep the porch, trim the rancher's beard or hair, and then vanish into the small room behind the barn. The rancher had asked where he slept, but the man only tilted his head, as if he didn't understand the question, or didn't want to. At night, lantern light flickered from under the door of the barber's cabin, but no sound ever came from inside. Sometimes, the rancher thought he heard whispering or scratching behind the walls, but when he checked, there was nothing but silence. Days passed, and the unease crept in like a cold draft. Something wasn't right. The man moved too smoothly, like he floated instead of walked. And his tools, they never rusted, never dulled. Not even after the harsh desert wind filled everything with grit. The rancher started sleeping with one eye open, haunted by dreams he couldn't explain. The breath left his lungs as he stumbled back from the mirror. His father had died 30 years ago, long before he ever came west. But he knew that script. It was burned into his memory from letters, from old journals. The barber stood in the corner now, watching, silent as always. But this time, the rancher could feel something coming from him, not menace exactly, but sorrow. A deep, ancient kind of sorrow. "Who are you?" the rancher whispered. The barber didn't move. His eyes, dark as pitch, seemed to shimmer with something unspoken. The rancher turned back to the mirror, now fogged entirely. He wiped it clean with a shaking hand. For a second, he saw a different reflection. Himself, younger, wearing the Union blues from the war. Then it was gone. Just him again. And the barber. Silent. Still. In the days that followed, the rancher couldn't shake the feeling that something had been unlocked. His dreams turned vivid. He saw battles he'd forgotten, comrades long gone, and a little boy crying beside a burning cabin. He began hearing things during the day too, snippets of piano music, the clinking of spurs with no boots to match. The barber kept cutting, cleaning, and disappearing each evening, but the air between them had shifted. There was an understanding now. A presence. One morning, the rancher decided to search the cabin behind the barn. He hadn't dared enter it before, but now, something urged him on. Inside, he found only a single chair, a table, and a cracked mirror. But when he looked into it, this time, he didn't see himself. He saw a photograph stuck to the glass. A young black soldier. Him. And beside him, another man, the silent barber, smiling. The shock hit him like a horse's kick. He tore the photo from the glass and flipped it over. On the back was scrawled, "We made it out together. Don't forget me." The rancher staggered back, sitting heavily on the wooden floor. Memories he had long buried began clawing their way to the surface. The war. The escape. The brotherhood. And then the betrayal, how he had run when the bullets flew, leaving his best friend behind. He had convinced himself the man died. But what if he hadn't? What if he had become something else? Someone who waited decades for him to remember? The barber appeared in the doorway now. His face was older, lined by time and pain. He said nothing, but in his eyes was everything the rancher needed to know. Forgiveness, grief, and something far deeper. That night, they sat together for the first time. No tools, no mirror. Just two men in the still of a desert night, the stars blazing like silver eyes overhead. The barber finally spoke, his voice a dry rasp, like wind over stone. "I waited for you." The rancher lowered his head, shame thick in his throat. "I thought you died." The barber shook his head slowly. "I did, in a way." They talked until the sun peeked over the horizon, reliving days of glory and regret. The rancher realized he had spent his whole life running, from the war, from his past, from himself. But the barber, his friend, had been there all along, waiting for him to face it. Waiting to remind him of who he really was. And what he had left unfinished. In the following days, the ranch transformed. Not in appearance, but in spirit. The winds felt calmer, the cattle more at ease. The land, once hardened by silence and solitude, breathed with a quiet peace. The rancher reopened the old barber shop for the townfolk, who began trickling in, curious about the strange, silent man with the sharpest hands they'd ever seen. Stories spread like wildfire, but none of them touched the truth. The truth lived in glances, in quiet nods, in the way the barber always looked at the mirror before each cut. The rancher watched him closely, learning to see not just with eyes, but with memory. Each snip of the scissors was a prayer. Each sweep of the brush, a confession. One evening, a little girl wandered into the shop, no more than 6 years old, barefoot, eyes wide as the prairie. She climbed into the chair without a word. The barber looked at her, then at the rancher. Something passed between them. The girl pointed at the mirror. "That's not me," she said, voice like bells. The mirror showed a reflection, but not hers. A woman, older, crying. The rancher stepped forward, heart pounding. "Who are you?" he asked. The girl only smiled. "I came to tell you." He remembers now. Then she was gone. Just like that. The chair empty, no sound of footsteps, no dust disturbed. But the mirror, it shimmered with gold light for hours after. That night, the barber vanished. No note, no trace. The room behind the barn stood empty, the tools gone. But the mirror remained. And carved deep into its wooden frame were the words, "Truth cuts deeper than any blade." The rancher knew what he had to do. He reopened the shop, not just as a place for haircuts, but as a sanctuary for stories, for healing. People came from all around, some lost, some seeking. And he listened to each one, offering not advice, but presence. He had learned that sometimes, silence was the most honest reply. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a man could do was remember. Years passed, and the rancher grew old. His hands stiffened, his back bent, but his eyes never lost their spark. He kept the mirror polished, always waiting to see a new name appear, a new message left behind by some wandering soul. He never spoke of the barber again. Not directly. But in his stories, his manner, his stillness, he carried that bond like a hidden scar. The ranch was no longer feared. It became known as a place where burdens could be laid down, where men faced their shadows and left a little lighter. And on quiet nights, if you listened close, you could still hear the snip of scissors in the wind. And see, just for a moment, two friends side by side in the mirror's glow. If this story gave you goosebumps like it did to us, leave a comment below with your thoughts or theories. We read every single one. And of course, give it a like to help more people discover these forgotten tales. Don't forget to subscribe and join our community of history hunters and mystery lovers. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your past closer.